This is an instructional video on how to remove the top plate of a motor pod and replace it or do any work that needs doing in terms of the motor or switch. So let's start. The first thing to do is to remove the knob on the switch. So we use the correct size Allen key in here. Just undo it slightly, lift off. Next thing is to undo the nut that holds the switch on. Okay, so I'm happening to use a box spanner here, but just a pair of long nose pliers will do the job equally well. And we just hold the switch spindle and undo that. Switch will drop out. Okay. Next thing is let's take the top plate off, and we simply undo the screws. Sorry, that's the wrong, use an Allen key for the screws. Use the cross-head screwdriver, of course, for the motor screws, which are cross-headed. Now these screws have a little rubber O-ring attached to them, so it won't fall off, but just be aware that there is an O-ring attached to them in case you think it needs to be removed or something. Okay, as soon as these 3 screws are off, we can remove the lid, and what's going to happen at this point is that the LED is just usually attached in either by a friction fit or sometimes it's glued in. So we'll find out in a minute, whatever the case may be. Okay, so the LED is sort of pushed in. If you look closely, there's actually tape here which tends to give it a bit of a friction fit, and then there's a bit of hot melt on as well, which kind of really secures it and glues it in there. The next thing we'll do, if you happen to be needing to replace the whole top plate completely, then we just simply detach the motor, and that's dead straightforward. I'm not going to do it for this because it's not really necessary, but all you do is you'd get a crosshead screwdriver, undo those 3 screws, let the motor drop out, and that's it. And then we can start reassembling this with the new top plate. Okay, now the tricky bit of this whole operation is the switch, because the switch has a tiny little tang washer on it. Can you really close up on this so that you can actually see? If you look, there's a little kind of lug here. Now if we turn the switch up the wrong way, in other words like this, that tang will fall out, and I've got it in my hand here. You can see that it's got a kind of metal lug coming out the side. Now the position of that metal lug is very important. When you're reassembling a switch, it has to be in the right positions. There's a series of little holes around here, and basically you need to pull the switch right back round as far anti-clockwise as it can go. Okay, you might have to grip that with a pair of pliers, but to be honest, if you haven't moved the switch, you don't even need to do that. But this tang goes in at a position, if you're thinking of that as a clock face, okay, the 12 o'clock position is kind of dead vertical, and this goes in just to the left hand side of vertical. Alright, you can hopefully see that tang is just to the left hand side of vertical. If that position is not correct, the switch will not work properly. Okay, so that's the really tricky bit of this. And reassembly now is a straightforward reversal of the what we've just done. We'll let the switch line the bottom there while we put in the LED. Actually, we'll put the switch on first, because I think that's just a touch easier. Make sure you don't get the wires crossed over with the motor wires, because obviously you don't want to tangle that up. Okay, now the other thing to note is that when you put in the switch, it needs to go in the correct orientation, because this little circuit board can foul the inside of the pod housing if it's not at the right angle. You want to position it so it's away from the pod housing, okay, that way it's not going to foul or anything. When you attach it, just make sure it's not touching the motor, because if it touches the motor, it's a bad idea. It can vibrate against the motor as it's running, and that will cause a noise, and you'll think, what's that noise? And it's the switch touching the motor. So just make sure that isn't happening, and we'll re-tighten up the I've done that finger tight at the moment. It doesn't need to be done terribly tightly again. When you're tightening this up, just keep it fairly low tension, but it must be tight enough so the switch won't rotate, but you don't want to kind of really overdo it too much. I'm doing it fairly hard there, but you don't want to really do it up as tightly as you possibly can, because it can actually just stress the switch. Just test the firmness of the switch underneath. I'm just trying to rotate it, see if it'll move. No, it doesn't move, so the switch is going to be fine. And lastly, and we mustn't forget this, is that we put in the little LED in its hole, and ideally you should use a tacky glue to kind of hold this in position again. Difficulty seeing where it's gone now. There it is, yeah. There should be a bit of glue on that, really, just in case it vibrates out of position. Because in transit in particular, I mean, it's not like it's happening at home, but in transit in particular, with a lot of vibration, that can vibrate loose. So a little bit of hot melt or Evo stick, any kind of contact adhesive glue would do the job fine. Just make sure all the wires are out of the way, and we can reattach this in here. Remember, the motor is orientated in the gap of where there's a kind of, let's just put it to the camera, there's a gap on the PCB, where cutout, where the motor is obviously going to fit. You cannot get that wrong. So we simply put that together and reattach it. Okay, we're just about there. So next step is we put in the 3 bolts again. For the sake of time, I'm not going to do them all up. The last step is then obviously to put the switch on, and the indent on the switch should go towards the LED. Okay, so when you tighten it so that's pointing in that direction. The only other thing to watch is that when you tighten it, it's not tightened such that the switch is touching the face, because otherwise as you turn it, there'll be a lot of friction and you'll graunch it. So it needs to be tightened so there's about 1/2 mm or 1 mm clearance, a gap between the top plate and the switch. And that ends our instructional video. So thank you for watching.